Bonjour à tous, on est très heureux aujourd'hui d'être là avec vous pour cette session de Lunch and Live Demo. C'est une première pour Atenco et Applitools aujourd'hui. On a décidé d'avoir un nouveau format qui vraiment réponde aux attentes de notre audience, c'est-à-dire d'avoir une démonstration vraiment dans le détail, technique, qui va être réalisée par un expert Applitools, avec déjà quelques partages d'informations classiques. Donc le webinaire d'aujourd'hui, il est enregistré. Je vous enverrai, vous recevrez le lien de l'enregistrement ultérieurement. Votre micro est désactivé, vous pouvez utiliser le chat directement et on répondra à vos questions ou à vos problématiques. Vous pouvez les poser évidemment dans la partie questions et réponses, toutes vos questions. J'espère que vous avez préparé vos questions. Posez-les, on y répondra au maximum en live à la fin de la démonstration de l'IRAN. Et puis, on vous proposera aussi un questionnaire de satisfaction. Donc, les présentateurs aujourd'hui, donc moi-même, Nicolas Lègle, je suis directeur général d'Atenco. Je vais vous présenter rapidement qui est Atenco, parce que vous ne connaissez peut-être pas. Et puis, avec moi, l'IRAN aujourd'hui. Donc, l'IRAN, il parle anglais. Donc, c'est ce que j'ai dit dans l'invitation. La présentation aujourd'hui, elle sera en français et en anglais. N'hésitez pas à poser vos questions en français. Je les reposerai en anglais à l'IRAN. La démonstration technique sera en anglais par l'IRAN. Enfin, il parle couramment Selenium, il parle couramment technique, donc je pense que ça ne devrait pas poser de problème. C'est vraiment un expert de la solution. Donc, l'IRAN, il est directeur de solutions engineering chez Applitools. Et je sais qu'il est en congé cette semaine, donc merci l'IRAN d'avoir posé ça. So, thank you l'IRAN to be here with us today. Okay?
My pleasure.
Alors, pour continuer avec l'agenda, donc aujourd'hui, une brève introduction. On va passer beaucoup de temps sur la démo live d'Appli-Tools. Et puis, on va garder quand même 10 minutes, si possible, 10-15 minutes pour les questions à la fin. Donc, là, déjà, donc, Atenco, donc, nous, on est là vraiment une société pour vous aider, pour faciliter les tests. C'est vraiment le mot d'ordre. Donc, on facilite les relations avec les éditeurs. On n'est pas éditeurs nous-mêmes, mais on a un réseau de partenaires et d'éditeurs qu'on connaît très bien. Et on vous aide avec cette partie-là. On a aujourd'hui un écosystème technologique qui est à la fois tout intégré, complémentaire et modulaire, le plus complet du marché à ce jour. Évidemment, on a négocié des conditions commerciales au global avec tous les éditeurs pour vous faire bénéficier à tous nos clients en Europe des meilleures conditions. On a également un haut niveau d'expertise. On est vraiment expert dans le test et la qualité logicielle. Quand vous en avez vraiment besoin, vous faites appel à nous, parce qu'on veut vraiment vous rendre un maximum autonome. Et puis vraiment, on est vraiment là pour tout type de tests. Vous allez le voir dans la slide suivante, pour toutes vos applications, que ce soit du front, du back, du mainframe ou autre. Notre écosystème technologique aujourd'hui, vous rencontrez évidemment Applitools, on va passer par les deux aujourd'hui, mais vous voyez qu'on a une gamme et un portefeuille applicatif de partenaires à la fois riche, complémentaire, avec des tests mobiles, avec des tests de charge, des tests d'accessibilité, du test de tout type, de la conception de test aussi avec smart testing, référentiel de test et autres. Donc, nous, notre rôle, c'est vraiment de trouver la meilleure solution pour vous. Et si cette solution-là n'existe pas dans nos portefeuilles aujourd'hui, que vous avez de la peine à la sourcer, vous nous en faites part et on peut regarder si on peut la sourcer pour vous. Et puis, toutes les solutions, on les propose évidemment. D'abord, on va vous aider avec un audit. On va vous aider à évaluer la maturité de votre assurance qualité aujourd'hui. Vous proposez un plan directeur. Ensuite, si vous dites, OK, des solutions peuvent être intéressantes, on peut vous aider à les évaluer techniquement sous forme d'un POC sur un format qui reste à définir. Ensuite, on vous aide à mettre en place avec nos éditeurs partenaires les solutions. On vous forme, on forme vos équipes également pour vous rendre un maximum autonome. Et ensuite, une fois que vous êtes autonome, là, on va vous offrir de l'assistance à la demande quand vous en avez besoin. Donc, Applitools, c'est vraiment la plateforme aujourd'hui intelligente, la plus complète du marché. Et je suis très heureux, l'IRAN, I'm super happy because we have a new feature. Il y a une nouvelle fonctionnalité qui vient d'être annoncée par Applitools, Ultra Fast Grid. Vous verrez, c'est pour l'exécution en parallélisé sur tous les navigateurs et les mobiles, qui était jusqu'à maintenant pas disponible sur les applications natives. Et là, ça vient d'être annoncé. Il y a même une possibilité de souscrire au programme bêta. Et l'IRAN nous en parlera plus en détail. Mais Applitools, vraiment, pourquoi Applitools existe, c'est que à l'origine, le fondateur avait besoin de valider visuellement des applications et il ne trouvait pas ce qu'il voulait sur le marché à l'époque. C'est souvent un schéma classique chez les éditeurs et il a décidé de développer lui-même sa solution. Alors, qu'est-ce qui n'allait pas? C'est qu'il arrivait à faire des tests avec comparer des IHM, une version A avec une version B. En revanche, il y avait beaucoup de faux positifs parce que les solutions proposaient que de la comparaison pixel par pixel. Et Applitools est très intelligent, vous allez le voir, il permet de rajouter de la tolérance dans vos cas de test avec vraiment une intelligence et des algorithmes très, très intelligents derrière qui vont vous permettre de réduire à un maximum le nombre de faux positifs. Et ça, c'est hyper intéressant parce que vous allez gagner beaucoup de temps dans l'analyse de vos tests. Et en amont, vous allez voir que probablement une grande partie d'entre vous font déjà des tests avec des frameworks, Selenium, Cypress, ou même du Tosca ou Catalan, ou peu importe le framework, parce que Applitools vient avec un kit de SDK et d'intégration vraiment énorme qui va vous permettre d'optimiser, de réutiliser votre existant. Vous allez voir, Applitools vient par-dessus vos tests, mais va vous aider à scripter beaucoup plus vite avec des assertions visuelles. Et ça, Liran pourra en parler beaucoup plus que moi. Et puis, évidemment, Applitools, c'est aussi pour faire de la rapidité, de la vélocité, intégré dans votre chaîne de DevOps, d'intégration continue, absolument. Alors, là où on dit aussi que c'est très, très rapide et c'est parfait sur tous les écrans, ce qui compte pour les utilisateurs d'Appli-Tools, c'est qu'il y a une expérience client la plus parfaite, visuellement parfaite. Et on va voir aussi qu'Appli-Tools, c'est pour des tests fonctionnels. On va enrichir les tests fonctionnels, la couverture fonctionnelle et la couverture visuelle. Mais quand on dit que c'est parfait sur tous les écrans, évidemment, oui, c'est important. Si vous avez un e-commerce ou même une solution e-banking, par exemple, vous avez besoin que vos clients ils puissent naviguer, ils puissent avoir une expérience la plus parfaite possible sur tout type de navigateur et sur tout type de mobile ou de tablette. Et ça, Applitools le fait très très bien avec vraiment une innovation que je trouve fantastique qui s'appelle Ultra Fast Grid, qui en gros vous permet depuis un seul cas de test d'exécuter sur le nombre de navigateurs qu'il vous faut et de mobiles. Et maintenant disponible sur l'application native également. Applitools, c'est prouvé, va jusqu'à 5,8 fois plus vite pour scripter, pour créer vos scripts. Vous allez le voir comment, avec une efficacité aussi très importante. Beaucoup plus stable également, il y a beaucoup moins de faux positifs. Les assertions visuelles permettent également à vos tests de passer, alors que vos IHM évoluent constamment, au site web, et c'est important d'avoir une solution stable. Et puis, Applitools va permettre de détecter beaucoup plus de bugs qui, si on faisait des tests ou des validations manuelles, ne seraient pas détectés. Donc là, Liran, je te propose de prendre la main pour partager ce que tu veux. The stage is yours, comme on dit en anglais. Et si jamais j'ai des questions, if I have questions, I will interrupt you and we can talk a few questions during the presentation and at the end. Donc à la fin, gardez bien vos questions posées dans la partie Q&A. Voilà, je te propose de... J'arrête de partager, Liran. I stop the sharing and you can start.
So let's get started, and now we will see a new approach for functional testing through visual AI. I'll share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, oui.
All right, let's get started. Okay, and voila. All right. So why are we all here for, right? What are we going to see? So obviously catching bugs is the most critical part for testing. And what seems to be less of a priority in most cases is visual bugs, because basically no one is asking specifically for them. But in reality, everyone are looking for the same thing, right? All testing teams, basically all they want is to release faster. Why is that? Because by releasing faster, or sort of, or should we say, testing faster, we can release our code with a greater certainty and therefore respond to the market faster. So let's look on how testing will look like. And we are all familiar with the testing pyramid, but they took the liberty to slightly modify it a little bit. And we will start from here. Unit testing over here is the core functionality of testing, is the most basic one, and in most cases is owned by the developers themselves, where they test their standalone monoliths or microservices that each and every function works. And the more we go up, we have the API testing. This is for testing the servers, the backend side. after connecting it to multiple machines, to multiple databases, basically making sure that different microservices works together and doesn't break each other. And today we're going to focus on the UI testing, on the end-to-end layer. And why is that? It's because you can have the best server in the world and the best JavaScript or unit level functionalities in the world. But if the overall experience doesn't work well, no one is going to use your product. So what is UI testing? The most widespread type of functional testing in the market by far. There are different platforms, and Applitools obviously support all of them, but there are different platforms like Selenium for web, Appium for mobile, Cypress is the new generation, let's call it, platform for UI, for web testing. And in this layer, we're focusing on testing the functionality of the UI, how the UI operates. And a test looks as a sequence of steps where if we will try to simulate it or to divide it into the two main categories that defines it, we have the first layer where we simulate the user inputs, navigations to different pages, clicking on different elements, swipes, keystrokes, etc. And then we have the validation part. Basically, the validation part is where we are actually testing our app. Do we meet a certain set of requirements for a given scenario? This is the test. And this is where Applitools focus on. So let's have a look on a very simple functional UI test of a login. On the left-hand side, we see the expected result. We want to log in or we want to see that if we are clicking on the sign in without setting email and password, we're seeing the required error over here. So how would the test would look like? We would have, this is in Cypress in this case, but the logic is across everything. The first action is the navigation. Let's go to this URL. Another action of clicking on the submit button. And then we basically need to break down the page to all of the different components constructing it and making sure that the conditions that we defined for that page are met. Whether we have the required over here, the required over here, and that translates to assertion in line 8, another assertion in line 12, and another assertion that it still says sign in. And here, for example, this is a classic example for a visual button. The sign in button, someone broke the CSS file, and we see it over here, okay? Of course, this is a bug. Our front-end engineers would need to fix that. But here's an example for a functional bug, where the required element basically disappeared, okay? So classic visual bug and a functional bug. The functionality of the alerting system was broken. But surprise, surprise, the test that we had from before, even under this circumstances, still passed. Why is that? We would imagine that if we have an assertion that it says required and it's visible, the test will pass. But over here, we as users don't see the element. But on the web, on the HTML side, on the DOM side, it's still here, just white on white. So it's sort of a classic visual bug that has a direct effect on the functionality. And now I want to take you to even more comprehensive example where we have a huge data set that we need to validate. Think about how many assertions we would need to write for this type of page. Assertion for each and every line and each and every column in this table, and the error message down below. And how many functional assertions we would need here, right? The text element, the emails, the counters, the user email, the user address, the menu, and so on and so forth. And the most annoying part is that even if we have the best test in the world, we still gonna spend tremendous amount of hours, manpower, on triaging the results. Because when we write a test by breaking down the elements, constructing it, and having an assertion for each one of them, if something goes wrong, we would need to go over endless list of logs to go and try and understand where the error was. And that requires familiarity with our logs, meaning a lot of expertise, and it's still going to take a lot of time. And here's where the pain. Most organizations struggle to succeed with UI testing, and the reason is that every assertion that we have in our code increases the maintenance overhead. It requires coding skills to create and maintain the tests. And it checks system functionalities via the UI and not the UI itself. And even more than that, by taking this approach, the only type of bugs that we can find are those that we were prepared for, that we expected, that we had an assertion for. Anything outside of the scope of the assertions that we wrote would go, we will not see that. And above all that, manual testing, and as a result of all of that, manual testing is still needed. And now I want to show you the solution, UI testing with visual AI. Let's get rid of all of the assertions and look at the page in a more holistic way. Instead of breaking down the page to the components that constructing it, let's look at the page as one unit, as our users will do. Let's look at the page and verify whether it met the requirements. And this is what we did. We came up with an SDK with 40 plus SDKs for different languages that allows you to get rid of all of those assertions, the UI assertions, take a screenshot, and then validate it with the expected result. So a single assertion gives us a full coverage of the functionalities that we needed before. As a bonus, we also validate the UI, the fonts, the formats, the style, and others. It doesn't break when the UI changes because we don't need to update any locators anymore. And it doesn't require any coding skills to maintain the baselines. And you would even get root cause analysis free of charge. And I'll show you how that will be. If you will look on UI versus visual testing, we will see that UI testing, everything that the UI testing can do, visual testing can do and more. And the part that visual cannot cover, it is most likely that it will be better covered with API or unit testing because it's in the background, and the unit testing and the API testing addresses the background. And now let's see that in action. So I have a few examples, one in Selenium Java and one in Cypress. I've shown you the Cypress one, and we will share later on the code examples that we will see right now through a open source GitHub repo that I created. But for now, I want to show you example, or a very simple example. So over here we have a page, a very standard page with a login form. And I have it in two versions. I have it in the correct version and the buggy version, okay, the version with the bugs. And what we will do now, we will see what it will take to test this type of page with the, let's call it classic approach, the assertions, and how easy that would be with Applitools, with visual assertions. So I'm going to start with the traditional suite, and if I will look on this page, the first test that I would like to write is that the page loaded properly. And what will it mean that it loaded properly? It says here login form. We have the icon on the top, username, password, Twitter icon, Facebook icon, LinkedIn icon, remember me, checkbox is empty. We see the enter your password error and the login. And it will also be translated this amount assertion. Do we have the log form? Do we have the username label, the username element, the password label, the password element, and so on and so forth. And if I will run it now on the original app without the bugs, the test will run. In this case, on my local Chrome, it will spin up, and the test passed. If I will switch it to the buggy version, now we expect it to fail. But I want to show you one thing about it. When it fails, it's really hard to understand what was the reason that it failed, right? The only thing that we get is that there is something happened in line 51. So I need to go here and now ask myself, what does it mean? It means that auth header get text contains login form is not true. Let's see why is that. All right, yeah, it says logout form instead of login form. So that is the reason. But as you can see, I need to be familiar with this, with reading it. And when it happens, after I will fix that, now we'll need to run the test again to validate the remaining assertions. And again until I get a clear coverage. So this is one part of triaging the results, which is a pain when we're doing it with traditional assertions. And now I want to show you how does this test will look like if I will look at it from the visual aspect. Just a minute, let me confirm that I'm running on the version A here. True, that's it. That's all I wanted to do. So what I will do now, I will run the test on the correct version, and I will ask Applitools to take a screenshot. And by doing so, Applitools will establish a baseline. Then I will ask my testers, my developers, my designers, the product owners, whoever that would be who is in charge of the test, to go to Applitools account, confirm that the screenshot that was taken indeed meet the requirements of the test. Here it is. And now we can see that we have the login form, the username, the enter username, the password, and so on. Now I'm going to run the test one more time, and I'm expecting it to pass. Since I'm still running on the correct version, there won't be any visual differences. Everything is exactly the same. So Applitools will confirm that for me without any assertions whatsoever. The test is just one line of code of taking a screenshot. I will get the indication through the test passed, and also in Applitools that I have a valid comparison. But what will happen if I have some bugs? I noticed in the chat that there was a Nicola to the panelists, something in French. So I'm not sure what it means, Nicola.
No,
Oh,
Liran,
you can ask
sorry.
questions in
Yeah,
French
yeah,
and you will translate to English. All right,
correct.
apparently I know how to read French.
Yes.
All right. So now in this case, we had some differences. The test failed, and we are instructed to go to this link. In this link, this is the Applitools dashboard. We will now see why the test had failed. We will see that it basically found all the differences that we had in the page. Now I'll toggle really quickly between the screenshots, and we will see that the elements that got missing were captured. The syntax here, the text here that was changed was also covered. Movement, the missing icon, the broken text here, everything was covered through the UI, which is far easier to understand where the problems are than going over those logs and those error messages that we need to be very familiar with the script itself in order to understand the app, which are two completely different things, right? We have our app, which we need to look at it as a customer, and we have the code behind it, the test code, which is something internal. Now anyone can test it. And the most beautiful part about it is the root cause analysis. Not only that we will find for you those differences, we would even give you all the data that you need in order to open meaningful bugs. So not only that you would be able to say, listen guys, instead of saying login form, it says logout form, or instead of having those two icons, now I don't see anything in here. With the click of a button, you would be able to investigate the DOM of the before and after. You would be able to investigate what has changed in the app that you are testing. As you can see here, the placeholder got changed from enter username to John Smith, which is a security problem. Instead of saying enter a username, we are now seeing the real username, the same as with the password. Okay? Any questions so far? I'll pause for a minute and then I'll continue on.
Pas de questions, no question, pas de questions pour le moment dans l'audience. N'hésitez pas, hein, si vous voulez. Soit vous pouvez attendre, soit poser déjà des questions dans le chat ou dans la partie QR. Bon, you can continue, Liran.
Okay.
I will tell you if we have questions.
Okay, perfect. So now that we've seen this approach, we see how this way of testing, and I'm not even talking about Applitools as for now, I'm talking about the approach, why this is a superior approach than breaking down the page to different elements one by one. It is faster to write, it is easier to maintain, you need less coding skills to maintain it, and you have full coverage with root cause analysis, with the enlightenment, the understanding of what was changing when something is broken.
Mhm.
And it all takes us back to faster releases, greater coverage, and increased speed. Okay, this is what allows you to get to that point. Okay, and of course, everything applies to more extensive tests, like validating the successful login versus unsuccessful login. I can just take a screenshot instead of adding the assertions. Okay, I'm basically reducing the amount of assertions in my script. This is the key for success. And now I want to take you, so we talked about the approach, why the approach is superior. And now I want to show you a few examples why you should do it with Applitools and not with other solutions. And the reason is that when you are taking this approach, you are fully dependent on the accuracy of the matching algorithm. If the matching algorithm that dictates whether two images are the same will be fragile, you would suffer from a lot of false positives that will basically take all the meaning that it will take this approach and make it meaningless. And a fun story about Applitools, this is how Applitools started. It started when 7 or 8 years ago now, when our co-founders looked on this approach and tried to find a solid matching algorithm. And when they couldn't find one, luckily for us, they built one. And they built it in a way that it is AI based. Okay. when we are doing the comparison between one image to another, we are not validating pixel to pixel. Pixel to pixel is the easy approach. At the end of the day, images are metrics of pixels, and sorry for taking all of us back to the university for a minute. If I want to make sure that two images are the same, matrix A minus matrix B, if we get a matrix full of zeros, identical. But in reality, it never happens. It simply never happens due to small changes at the pixel level that the human eye is not able to see, such as cross anti-aliasing and rendering and page shifting one pixel to the left and right, and many others examples. And I will show you a few of them. I see that we have a question
Une
by
question,
Nabil.
Liran. Yes. Do we couple the automated test case from the back office with the front office, you know?
Do we create? I think the answer, the question is, do we need to have a baseline per test that we have in our
No, it's more
script?
automated test case from the back office layer.
What do you mean by the
From
back office?
the back end, I think.
Oh, so we are testing the UI, the front end. Back end, we need to test it, but it's not something that Applitools is focusing on. We are, our expertise is around visual
Sur le, ouais, c'est sur le front.
hence front
Ouais.
end.
Ah, bien sûr, vous pouvez avoir un scénario qui part sur un parcours client sur lequel vous avez besoin de valider des éléments du back, ok? Tout ce qui va être non UI, par exemple, non IHM, mais Applitools, c'est pour vraiment faire du test d'IHM, valider l'UX et l'UI. J'espère que ça répond à votre question.
All right.
Can continue.
Yeah. Okay. So now I want to focus on why we should do it with Applitools. So we said that pixel to pixel doesn't work. Anti-aliasing, page shifting one pixel to the left and right, kerning differences, brightness differences. There are so many factors that goes on. Deployment on different machines that will those type of differences will make the comparison basically non-reliable, and hence the approach non-sustainable. And Applitools built AI engine to do these comparisons, fully trained with over 1 billion images over the years, that will replicate the human eye and human brain, and we will see it now. So here's a few examples of why do we need AI when we're comparing two images. So now I'm going to toggle really quickly between the two images that I have, the baseline image and the checkpoint image. And we will see over here that indeed there are some differences, and Applitools found all of them. One of them here is that we have different text, right? Different advertisement. So we've added 12 to ignore certain areas from the page. If this is an advertisement that I'm getting from a third-side library, I probably already tested the connectivity over the API layer. I would like to exclude that from my test. Another thing over here is that we have an element that shifts. And we need AI to allow us to search whether the element is inside given boundaries. So we have another customization that we can apply called floating region, which will allow us to search whether a specific element exists within some boundaries. And now, since it's inside and it's exactly the same logo, this area will not be flagged. But now I want to show you a very interesting example, and that applies to almost any application out there. In nowadays, almost all of the applications are to some extent dynamic by content, dynamic by nature. And here we have the contact list, which of course from time to time will change in order and in content. So the question is, how can we test this page if we're looking at it from the through the UI? For humans, it's quite easy, right? We know that we expect to see a list of contacts, and we don't really care if it says Avner, Odelia, Daniel, and Gil, or Avner, Gil, Odelia, and Daniel. It doesn't really matter. So we created another match algorithm called layout, which allows you to test dynamic elements, whether we have the same type of elements, even though their content is different. Okay? And this is a great example of why we need AI. Only AI can validate or can understand that here we have a list and not validating the content of the list. Okay? I can do the same. We have another filter for color differences. Over here, you can see the green turns into blue. I have content region to validate the colors. And the one last thing that we have across those two screenshots is that we have one last bug over here. And if I will click on the radar button, we will see that we had a typo where more turned into mora, right? And I want to show you that the triangle here that shifted was not highlighted because this is a meaningless movement. While in here, it is meaningful. So when we see a bug, we can mark it, record it, link it to Jira, and ask Dennis or Ohad, please fix it. Now we will get an email asking him to fix this error. But you would probably ask yourself, what should I do if the differences that I see are expected differences? Here, for example, sorry, I want to show you this example. Here, for example, we are testing USA Today, which is one of the most popular newspaper in the US. And obviously the news keeps on changing from one day to another. So what should I do if I need to update the baseline? The images on the left-hand side are no longer relevant. The new one is the relevant one. This should be the new baseline for me for testing. Do I need to change anything in my script? Do I need to have coding skills? The answer is completely no. Just click on accept, save, and you are good to go. The baseline will be ready, will be updated for you for the next one. Okay? So Applitools will find all differences and will allow you to maintain and triaging the results really, really easily with a nice UI instead of going over the script itself and modifying the script. And here's a one final example for why do we need AI for validating that the content is the same and not using pixel to pixel. If we will look over here, we will see, if I would ask you to point out where the differences are, I would imagine that we will all agree that this is the only thing that is different between the baseline and the current image, right? We have the article here that is different, the top stories that is different, and the articles below. If I would do that on a pixel, we would see all the false positives that will be added up to this test. And we can see that at the pixel level, the header was broken as well. But it's a very minor and subtle change that it's basically a false positive. And we can see over here that it shifted one pixel to the left or right, and hence pixel to pixel will flag that. Strict by Applitools will not flag it. And that's just one example out of many.
Ça, c'est très important. Merci, Liran, parce que c'est vrai que des solutions classiques de pixel par pixel, bah, là, en fait, ça vous ferait un cas de test qui serait non passant. Et si vous en avez des milliers, des dizaines de milliers, comme sur certains de nos clients, bah, ça peut vite devenir un gros souci pour les phases d'analyse. D'accord? Donc, les messages clés que Liran il a dit, c'est Applitools est très très fort avec plein de fonctionnalités permettant d'être très granulaire dans la façon dont vous créez vos tests, de créer des zones, layout, content, strict. Ça, c'est vraiment des fonctionnalités qui ont été apportées par Applitools avec de l'intelligence artificielle, qui a été formée sur plus d'1 milliard d'images déjà. Ensuite, il y a la capacité d'Appli-Tools d'avoir des assertions plus faciles, c'est-à-dire de réduire le nombre de lignes de code qui sont nécessaires pour tester une image. Ça, c'est très important. Et vous avez toujours cette possibilité. Je dirais, vous avez souvent deux populations. Des automaticiens qui sont dans leur script, dans Cypress, et puis vous avez des populations de testeurs qui utilisent peut-être un logiciel de gestion des tests, type Qtest, Testrel ou Octane ou autre, ou X-Ray. Et bien, vous pourriez avoir imaginé cette population qui a besoin d'être dans Applitools uniquement de vérifier les baselines avec le pouce en l'air ou le pouce en bas quand l'image n'est pas conforme. Et à ce moment-là, si vous mettez le pouce en l'air, thumbs up, ça veut dire que ça devient la nouvelle image de référence pour exécuter vos tests. Donc, c'est vraiment très, très fort. Et voilà. Liran, maybe we can go to more...
Ultra fast grid.
Perfect.
Ultra fast grid.
Merci.
That's the next topic. Okay. So, we've seen how Applitools gonna increase the coverage with less code and less coding skill required. And that will all take us to increase speed, right? But I now want to show you how we solve the biggest pain point with respect for speed when talking about UI testing. If we would have this call 10 years ago, this would probably be the last slide or the last topic that we would needed to talk about. Because 10 years ago, everyone used IE on desktop. But nowadays, most of us are buying and going over the web through our mobile or through tablet or different desktop and different mobile sizes. And one of the greatest challenges for UI testing is to test the responsiveness, that the app is actually working across all of those devices. And why is that the challenge? Is mainly because all the complexities that we've talked about with the elements and the assertions and so on, by adding another browser, multiplies the complexity by 2. Adding 2 browsers, 3. 4 browsers, 5, and so on and so forth. But nowadays, everything is through the UI, right? We said that we can validate our app through the UI. And it takes us to the cross-browser testing domain. How can we do cross-browser testing more efficiently? Now, obviously, we can take the tests that we had before, log it into a Selenium grid, and run it on multiple browsers. One time on Firefox, one time on IE, one time on desktop, one time on mobile, and so on and so forth. And let's see how that all evolves. Here it is. And here it is. Yeah. So, cross-browser testing. Running a UI test locally looks like that. We have our application under test server. The developer's machine spins up a browser. Nowadays, it's commonly being Chrome that connects over here. And everything is behind the corporate firewall. And if we want to test on multiple browsers, we would spin up multiple machines that will connect to the application under test. And that could be done like this. That's basically a local Selenium grid. And when we wanted to expand even further than that and take away all the hustle of maintaining this grid, we turned into a remote Selenium grid, where basically we had on the cloud machines with browsers connected to a Selenium grid, that now the developer's machine or the test machine or the build machine connected to the browser connected back to the application, and this is how we scaled it up. But what is the challenge of taking this approach? First of all, since the browsers are outside of the corporate firewall, are on the cloud, we would need to open a network access, inbound network access, such as tunnels, Source Connect, and others, which at the end of the day is a backdoor to our app, which if we would have security experts on the call, no one likes it, right? It's always a risk because the remote VMs are at the end of the day unmanaged asset, and they can run software and they can access the internet, and it has access to your customer to your internal network. But even more than that, let's put security aside. When we have the browsers remotely now, or when we are testing the app on each and every browser, most of the bugs that we suffer from, like broken locators, broken connections to the database, logical errors, backend performance issues, and so on, will now happen on each and every one of them. And functional apps are 99 browser or device agnostic because the modern browsers are all compliant with the W3C standard. And basically, we don't really need to test the logical part on all of those browsers. Just the visual part still needed because this is completely different across different viewport sizes, different screen sizes, and different browsers. So what is the pain is that more and more organizations are unhappy with their lab providers because it takes the test longer to run. It is less stable due to delays, timeouts, network failures. It is security concerns. And at the end of the day, and this is probably the most critical part, we need to run each test multiple times. And now we're going to introduce you the solution for that pain, called the ultra-fast script. Instead of connecting the browsers to each and every machine, to the app outside, what we end up will do will be to run the test locally, hence faster and more secured and more robust. The machine will connect to your app. We will take a copy of the app at the assertions points only and not through the entire test. We will send the copy of the page to browsers on the cloud. Those will generate the images and we will get the response. And that will allow us to speed up our test tremendously faster because we can now harness all the machines that we have inside our corporate firewall for running the tests in parallel, allowing the cross-browser testing to be done in this approach. And let's see that in action. Now I'm going to run the same test from before, only that I'm going to ask Applitools. Here it is. Here. Let me just confirm that it's on the, yeah, true. So I'm going to ask Applitools to run the same test that we had before. It will run on my local Chrome. And instead of taking a screenshot, what we will actually do, we will take a DOM snapshot, the same DOM that we used for the root cause analysis. And Applitools will now generate the images for me on a variety of browsers and mobile devices simultaneously. And we can see how we covered in a single run the test over 10 different browsers, even, yeah, 10 different browsers. On Chrome and Firefox and Safari and IE 11 and iPhone 11, Galaxy S5 on portrait and landscape mode. And we have screenshots from each and every one of them. And now if I'll run the test again, we will see how the test passed or failed on all of those devices. Here it is. everything is being done simultaneously. We take the DOM only one time and validate it across all browsers for you, and we can see that everything passed. If I will switch it to the buggy version, we will see how it fails on those different browsers and how it action on each and every one of them differently. Now, as a side note, I will say that everything that we've seen so far today is supported across 40 different SDKs: Selenium, Cypress, Playwright, Puppeteer, Storybook, and others. And it can fully be hooked into your CI/CD pipeline, because at the end of the day, it's the same test that is running, and you would get the results back to your script itself as an exception, whether there were differences or not. So you can think about Applitools as the visual assertion point of Selenium, like any other Selenium assertion. It can fully be hooked into CI/CD. Okay?
Thank you, Liran. Thank you.
Sure.
I think
We'll
we
pause now
should
for
have
questions.
no,
Yes.
we should have a separate session on ultra-fast grid. It's really an important topic, and it's really cross-browser testing, multi-navigateur, multi-mobile, et c'est un vrai sujet pour beaucoup de nos clients. Donc, and now you have released the native app ultra-fast grid. C'était pas disponible jusqu'à maintenant. C'était pas pour les applications natives. Maintenant, ça l'est. Donc, we will do a separate session. On va prendre quelques questions, donc allez-y, hein, j'en ai déjà plusieurs, mais si vous voulez y aller, utilisez la partie Q et R, s'il vous plaît. Donc, une question, one question for you, Liran, you already almost answered, the CI/CD integration, what are the tools that we integrate well with today?
The answer is all of them, and the reason is that it's for all of them is that everything runs through your script. So if you're running the same way that you are running your test now, Applitools will be just another layer over there. So if we're talking about Jenkins or TeamCD or Tosca or Circle CI, anything, we support it because we run as part of the script itself.
Ok, thank you, Liran. Une autre question, it concerns the language. You know, we did not talk about the version of website, but the question is relevant. How Applitools test a multi-language website, des sites web multilangues, plusieurs versions, multiple versions.
I really like this topic because this is one of my favorite topics, because localization testing is probably one of the challenges, the greatest challenges for QA teams in Europe, because of all the different languages required, right? English, French, German, and others. And that we can solve it without needing to know the language, and how that will be done. When you think about visual assertions, we have the expected result, so we have the expected translation. So Applitools will act as the translator that confirm for you whether there were regressions in language or not. Here is, for example, sorry, I wanted this one. This is Facebook in French versus Spanish. And you can see, for example, that with Applitools, we first, with Loud, confirm that there are no regressions in the structure of the two languages. The test was flagged as match, even though the content is different. But if we want to validate the content itself, let's have a baseline for Facebook in English, baseline for Facebook in German, baseline for Facebook in Hebrew, and now all of you can validate all the languages without even knowing.
Donc en fait, on valide une fois la page dans la bonne langue, on en crée une baseline et après on exécute tous nos tests par rapport à cette baseline. Ça permet de valider toutes vos versions de site. Donc super. Liran, thank you. Go back to your vacation.
I'll go back to
Merci.
my wife. She's right in front of me.
Ok. Non,
All
c'était
right. Thank
super.
you, Nicolas,
Merci.
for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. Merci à toutes et à tous d'avoir participé à cette première édition de Lunch and Live Demo. J'espère que ça vous a plu. Bon appétit, bonne fin d'appétit si vous avez déjà terminé. J'espère que c'était un moment, vous avez appris des choses, vous avez pu vous faire une pause dans votre journée et l'enregistrement sera à votre disposition très bientôt. Merci, on a pris beaucoup de plaisir avec vous aujourd'hui et à bientôt. Bonne journée.
Bye
Bye bye.
bye.